The lights of Studio 6A burned soft gold against a backdrop of midnight blue. Rows of quiet faces filled the small audience space, each person leaning forward just enough to feel part of something historic. On stage, two chairs faced each other beneath the glow of carefully balanced spotlights, one reserved for America's most trusted interviewer, the other for one of the world's most polarizing women. When Diane Sawyer stepped into frame, a hush rolled through the room. For decades, she'd been the picture of composure, calm, articulate, unshakable. Presidents had blinked beneath her gaze. Movie stars had cried. Truth, in her hands, had always felt inevitable. She adjusted a simple black blazer, smiled toward the audience, and then turned to greet her guest. Meghan Markle entered with the ease of someone who had long ago learned that every step is part of the performance. Her cream silk blouse shimmered faintly under the lights, and the tailored navy suit sharpened every movement. She gave a controlled smile, a perfect calibration between warmth and distance, and extended her hand. "Meghan, thank you for joining me." "Thank you for inviting me, Diane," Meghan replied, her voice carrying that practiced blend of gratitude and restraint. "It's always nice to be somewhere people still believe in honest storytelling." The audience gave a polite chuckle, though a few eyebrows lifted. Diane's smile never wavered. "Then we're in the right place," she said softly. The cameras rolled. Red lights blinked alive. At first, it felt like any other primetime conversation. Two professionals trading courtesies, sipping from identical glasses of water, speaking in calm, measured tones. But beneath the civility, something in the air trembled. The kind of stillness that only exists right before thunder. Diane began with the easy questions: life in California, the children, the projects, the causes. Meghan answered smoothly, never missing a beat. She spoke of independence, resilience, the responsibility of using one's voice. Every sentence landed like a headline, crafted and certain. "Life has been full," she said, legs crossing neatly, diamond bracelet catching the light. "I've learned that peace isn't found, it's built. And I'm building mine on my own terms." It was eloquent, powerful, and undeniably defensive. Diane caught it instantly. She leaned forward, elbows resting lightly on her notepad. "You've always spoken about truth, Meghan," she said. "After all you've experienced, what does truth mean to you now?" Meghan hesitated for a fraction of a second, then smiled, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Truth," she said, "isn't universal. It's personal. It's the courage to say, this is my story, even when others want to rewrite it." It was the kind of answer that left no room for dialogue. A statement, not an exchange. Diane nodded slowly, acknowledging without agreeing. "Some would say truth also requires listening," she said gently. Meghan's smile stiffened. "And I've listened. For years. To criticism, assumptions, people who never met me deciding who I am. Listening isn't the issue, Diane. Being heard is." A subtle murmur rippled through the audience. It wasn't hostility, just that collective recognition that something in the temperature had changed. Diane's eyes flicked to her notes, then back to her guest. "And yet," she continued carefully, "many people feel they know you more now than ever. Interviews, documentaries, the book. Your voice has never been louder. Do you feel heard, or just amplified?" The question landed softly but cut deep. Meghan leaned back, folding her arms loosely. "I think amplification is the point. People in my position aren't handed microphones, they're handed scripts. I decided to write my own." Her tone was calm, yet the defiance threaded through every syllable. Diane didn't interrupt, she just observed. Decades of experience had taught her that the most revealing moments come in silence, in the pause between control and reaction. "Let's talk about your journey out of the royal family," she said after a moment. "You've described it before as liberation. Looking back now, do you still feel free?" A flicker crossed Meghan's face, brief but unmistakable. "Freedom," she repeated. "That's such an interesting word. People assume freedom means walking away. For me, it meant walking through expectation, judgment, and the double standards that come with being a woman who refuses to be defined." Her phrasing was immaculate, her voice deliberate. Yet to Diane's ear, every syllable sounded rehearsed. "I understand," Diane said softly. "But liberation often comes with reflection. Are there things you might have done differently?" Meghan's smile returned, thin and cool. "Reflection doesn't always mean regret, Diane. Sometimes it just means realizing how much stronger you were than they wanted you to be." The word they lingered in the air, heavy and undefined. Diane caught it. "Who's they? Meghan?" Meghan exhaled sharply, brushing an invisible crease from her blazer. "Anyone who thought my silence was compliance." The audience reacted again, this time with a low, collective hum. The conversation was no longer gentle. It was gathering voltage. Diane offered a small, diplomatic smile. "You've spoken about strength, but strength and humility often coexist. Do you feel you've balanced both?" There it was, the first spark. Meghan's eyes flickered, lips curving into something halfway between amusement and disbelief. "Humility," she said slowly, "is usually demanded of women who've already given too much. I've bowed enough in my life. I'm standing now." The words were elegant, yet edged like glass. Diane didn't flinch. "Standing is admirable," she said, "but sometimes standing still can keep us from hearing others." Meghan's brows rose. Or maybe standing tall finally makes people listen. The tension was quiet, sophisticated. Two women, one conversation, both unwilling to yield. The studio lights hummed overhead, bright enough to show the faint sheen of heat forming at Meghan's temple. Behind the cameras, producers whispered into headsets, marking the timestamps. They knew they were witnessing television gold, the kind that doesn't need shouting to feel explosive. Diane closed her notebook gently, signaling a transition. "Well," she said, her tone calm, "we've only just begun." And with that, the camera zoomed slightly closer on Meghan's face, her eyes sharp, her posture regal, her smile unwavering but cold. No one knew it yet, but that subtle exchange, the question about humility, the answer about pride, would become the first crack in the dam. For now, both women sat still, poised, unbroken. But beneath the surface, the storm was already rumbling, waiting for its cue. By the 20-minute mark, the polite rhythm of the interview had thinned to a fragile thread. The studio air, once warm with conversation, had cooled into something denser, heavier. The kind of silence that doesn't wait, but listens. Diane Sawyer sat steady, her pen resting neatly across her notes. She had conducted interviews with world leaders, survivors, and revolutionaries. She knew when the energy in a room began to change. And it was changing now. Across from her, Meghan Markle adjusted the cuff of her blazer. Every gesture, every tilt of her chin, seemed carefully measured. She wasn't rattled, not yet. But there was a flicker of impatience in the way her eyes darted toward the floor manager and back again. She wanted control, and Diane was quietly taking it from her. Diane smiled gently. "You've said before that privacy is sacred," she began. "But in a world where your name has become almost synonymous with media attention, how do you reconcile privacy with the choice to stay visible?" Meghan's laugh came softly, but it wasn't amused. "Privacy doesn't mean disappearing, Diane. It means boundaries. It means deciding what belongs to me and what belongs to the public. I decide what I share. That's power, not contradiction." The word power landed like a hammer. Diane didn't blink, but she caught it. "Some would argue," she said carefully, "that constant visibility can make those boundaries harder to maintain. That sharing invites scrutiny. Only if people forget that I'm a human being, not a headline," Meghan replied, the faintest edge creeping into her tone. The audience shifted in their seats. They weren't restless, they were transfixed. Meghan's voice carried the rhythm of someone who had been criticized too long and learned to strike first. Diane leaned forward slightly. "You've spoken often about being misunderstood. Do you feel misunderstood or misrepresented?" Meghan's lips pressed together, then curved upward. "Misunderstood assumes people tried to understand me. Most didn't. They created a caricature and called it truth. It was elegant, controlled, but the chill beneath her words was unmistakable. Still," Diane continued, When people see interviews, documentaries, podcasts, it might seem that you've had more opportunity than most to tell your story. And yet people still twist it. Meghan cut in quickly. That's the problem. You can be clear as day, and they'll still paint you in shadow. Her voice was calm but carried a quiet ferocity that filled the room. Diane nodded, acknowledging the point but not conceding it. Clarity helps, she said softly. But sometimes tone matters as much as truth. Meghan's brows lifted, amused, but her eyes hardened. Tone, she repeated, like the word itself offended her. It's funny how tone only becomes a problem when a woman stops apologizing. The audience gave a polite murmur of agreement mixed with discomfort. Diane's poise didn't crack. I don't think confidence is the issue, she said evenly. But there's a fine line between confidence and defensiveness. Do you feel you've crossed it at times? The air shifted. For a brief moment, Meghan didn't answer. Her silence stretched just long enough for the cameras to tighten their zoom. When she finally spoke, her words were cool and deliberate. Defensiveness is what people call truth when they don't like the sound of it. It was both clever and combative. The perfect soundbite, and the sharpest one yet. Behind the cameras, producers exchanged glances. Diane didn't look away. Let's talk about the royal family, she said, voice level but slightly firmer now. You've spoken about stepping away for your peace and independence. Looking back, do you still believe it was the right decision? Meghan's expression didn't move for several seconds. Then, with a faint smirk, she replied, absolutely. You don't regret leaving a place that taught you your worth only when you stayed silent. Gasps whispered through the audience like wind. Diane's tone remained calm. That's a powerful statement. It's an honest one, Meghan said, sitting a little taller. Diane nodded once, her gaze steady. Some say that walking away also meant walking away from the platform that helped amplify your causes: mental health, women's empowerment, racial equality. Do you feel that distance has affected your ability to reach people? Meghan's answer came fast, clipped. If people only listened to me because of a title, then they were never really listening. The chill in her tone was unmistakable now. Diane adjusted her notes. But doesn't visibility help the message? After all, the royal platform gave your work extraordinary reach. Meghan leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing. Visibility and validation aren't the same thing, Diane. I didn't need a palace to speak about women's rights. I didn't need a crown to care about humanity. Applause broke out in parts of the audience. Brief, scattered, uncertain. Diane waited for it to fade before speaking. And yet, some might argue that palace or not, visibility brought your message to millions. Is it possible that both things can be true? There was something different in her tone this time, a quiet firmness that hinted at challenge. Meghan's smile faded. Maybe, she said coolly. But I won't credit an institution that tried to erase me for helping me be seen. The words dropped like stones. For a moment, neither woman spoke. The studio lights hummed. The only sound was the soft mechanical whir of the cameras. Diane broke the silence first. It sounds as though forgiveness isn't something you're ready to extend. Meghan laughed softly, humorless. Forgiveness is earned, not demanded. I owe them nothing. There it was, the first fracture in composure. Diane's eyes flicked upward, her tone still calm but colder now. Some viewers might hear bitterness where you mean strength. Meghan tilted her head, her smile sharpened. That says more about the viewers than it does about me. A few audience members shifted uncomfortably. The tension was no longer subtle. It was visible, audible, alive. For the first time, Diane set her pen down. You speak passionately about redefining narratives, she said. But the risk of rewriting history is that it often replaces reflection with justification. It was a ray, pointed comment, measured but unmistakably critical. Meghan's eyes flickered. Or maybe rewriting history, she said slowly, is what happens when people finally tell the truth after centuries of lies. The silence afterward wasn't awkward, it was electric. Diane smiled faintly, the kind of smile that wasn't warmth but acknowledgement. Well, she said softly, this is certainly one for the history books. The camera framed both women in a tight shot now. Diane, steady and serene. Meghan, immaculate and unyielding. Two opposite forces locked in a polite storm. From the outside, it still looked calm. But inside the studio, everyone could feel it. The shift, the pressure, the inevitability. Something was building. And though neither woman knew it yet, the next 30 minutes would test the limits of composure, civility, and control. The storm had begun to move closer. The midpoint of the broadcast arrived with the deceptive calm of a steady heartbeat. The air inside Studio 6A no longer felt like oxygen. It felt like static. Producers in the control room spoke in whispers that no longer hid their worry. This wasn't the soft, polished conversation they had promised advertisers. This was something else, an emotional duel being fought with smiles. Diane Sawyer adjusted the edge of her notepad, buying herself a single breath before the next question. She had interviewed generals after defeat, survivors after tragedy, but never someone so determined to win an interview. Across from her, Meghan Markle sat motionless, back straight, chin lifted just enough to suggest command. The lights framed her like portraiture. Every hair was in place, every expression curated. But her eyes flickered, quick and restless. Control was her armor, and it was starting to crack. Diane leaned forward. "You've mentioned the importance of controlling your story," she said. "But when control becomes the priority, does honesty ever take a back seat?" The question floated between them like a lit match. Meghan's smile faltered for the briefest second. "I think honesty is control," she said evenly. "When you're the one speaking, no one else can twist your words." Diane's tone remained calm. "Yet critics argue that every time you speak, the story changes slightly. Do you think they might have a point?" Meghan's laugh was soft, sharp around the edges. "Critics always need something to say. If I breathed differently, they'd call it manipulation." The audience gave a polite, nervous laugh. The kind that tries to fill an awkward silence and only makes it worse. Diane didn't look away. "Some say consistency builds credibility. And some confuse consistency with compliance." Meghan snapped, her voice just a little too loud. The microphone caught the tremor in it. She quickly recovered, crossing her legs and folding her hands. "But I understand. People like the heroine simple, quiet, predictable." "That's not what I said," Diane replied, still composed. "I'm asking whether the constant effort to correct the narrative can sometimes blur the truth instead of clarifying it." Meghan's eyes narrowed. "It's interesting," she said slowly, "how women who defend themselves are accused of distorting reality, while institutions that lie for centuries are called traditional." A low hum of approval came from parts of the audience, but Diane didn't bite. She had spent decades letting others talk themselves into corners. "Let's take one example," she said. "The Netflix series. You described it as a chance to tell your story your way. But some of your own colleagues have said scenes were edited to appear more dramatic than they were. Do you accept that artistic license might have played a role in shaping perception?" Meghan tilted her head. "Are we calling truth artistic license now?" "I'm calling it editing," Diane replied. "Every storyteller makes choices." Meghan's eyes flashed. "I made mine for authenticity, not for entertainment." "Yet it aired on a streaming platform," Diane said softly. "That is entertainment." For the first time, Meghan's jaw clenched visibly. Her silence lasted a beat too long. The studio audience could hear the faint buzz of the cameras adjusting focus. Then she smiled again, but this time the warmth had drained away. "Let me guess," she said. "You're implying that I'm performing, that everything I do is calculated." "I'm suggesting," Diane answered carefully, "that authenticity and performance can overlap, even in this very chair." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Every pair of eyes behind the cameras was fixed on the two women. The conversation had crossed from polite tension into confrontation, though both of them still wore professional smiles. Meghan leaned forward. "You know, Diane, people often mistake composure for credibility. Just because someone speaks softly doesn't mean they're telling the truth." It was a clear jab. The audience reacted audibly, a collective inhale. Diane's pen tapped once against her notebook, her tell of irritation, before she stilled it. "Perhaps," she said finally, "but composure can also be respect. And respect is something we owe our audience. Meghan's lips curved. I think the audience respects honesty more than politeness. Then let's be honest, Diane said, voice low but firm. You say you left the royal family to escape the spotlight. But since then, the spotlight has never left you. Was leaving truly about peace or about control of the narrative? The words landed like a gavel. There was no mistaking the intent. The audience froze. Meghan blinked twice, the first real crack in her poise. That's an unfair question, she said. I left because peace is impossible when people profit from your pain. But you've profited from telling that story, Diane countered. Doesn't that complicate the message? The pause that followed was suffocating. Meghan opened her mouth, closed it, then inhaled slowly through her nose. When she spoke again, the sweetness was gone. What complicates the message, she said, is hypocrisy disguised as journalism. Gasps. Even the camera operator flinched. Diane's smile thinned. I've been called many things, Meghan, but not a hypocrite. Then maybe it's time someone did, Meghan replied, her tone slicing through the air. That was it. The fracture became visible. Years of polished poise cracked open in real time. The control room erupted into a flurry of voices. Cut to commercial. No, stay on them. But Diane didn't move. Her posture remained perfect, her tone deceptively calm. Let's take a breath, she said quietly. This isn't about accusation. It's about understanding. I understand perfectly, Meghan shot back. You want humility. You want remorse. You want me to shrink so everyone else can feel comfortable. No, Diane replied. I want perspective. Perspective, Meghan repeated, laughing bitterly. Perspective is a luxury for people who were never silenced. The audience was silent now. No shifting, no coughing, just the weight of tension pressing down on every seat. Diane straightened her papers, her calm finally showing its first edge of fatigue. I think our viewers can decide for themselves which one of us is silencing the other. Meghan's jaw tightened again. Her hands gripped the armrests of her chair. For a second, her composure faltered enough for the camera to catch the tremor in her fingers. Then she smiled, wide, bright, dangerous. You know, Diane, she said softly, people warned me you'd try to corner me. I told them I don't get cornered. Diane's voice was barely above a whisper. And yet here we are. The words landed like thunder in the silence. It was the moment when conversation turned into confrontation, when diplomacy evaporated and only pride remained. The red light on the main camera blinked. They were still live. Every second of this exchange was being transmitted to millions of living rooms. Diane exhaled once, then folded her hands. Let's continue, she said quietly. Her tone wasn't a request, it was a challenge. Meghan met her gaze without blinking. By all means, she replied. Neither of them smiled now. The performance was gone. What remained were two women sitting beneath the unforgiving heat of truth, each determined not to lose the last word. And somewhere between them, the idea of civility began to crumble. The breaking point had arrived. Silence. Heavy, absolute silence. The kind that swallows sound and turns seconds into small eternities. The cameras were still rolling, but no one dared to breathe too loudly. What had started as a carefully orchestrated primetime special had now slipped completely out of control. Diane Sawyer sat perfectly still, her hands folded over the notepad that had stopped being useful 10 minutes ago. In front of her, Meghan Markle was no longer the polished, composed figure who had entered the studio an hour earlier. She looked the same, immaculate as ever, but her expression had hardened into something different, something brittle. The world's most seasoned interviewer and one of its most scrutinized women were no longer conversing. They were confronting. Diane's voice broke the silence first, calm but stripped of warmth. Meghan, she began softly, you've spoken about reclaiming your voice, about control, about truth. But sometimes truth and accountability share the same space. Do you think that maybe, just maybe, there's a difference between being silenced and being disagreed with? The words landed with precision, like a scalpel cutting through the performance. Meghan's eyes narrowed. I think disagreement becomes disrespect when it's constant, Diane. You can't call something a debate when one side never listens. I am listening, Diane replied evenly. But listening doesn't mean agreeing. A ripple of murmurs traveled through the audience. Even through the glow of the studio lights, you could see their discomfort. This wasn't the light entertainment they'd expected. It was a slow-motion implosion. Diane continued. Do you feel, in any way, that the anger people sense from you overshadows your message? Anger. Meghan repeated, incredulous. Men are passionate. Women are angry. That's the difference. I'm not angry. I'm awake. It was a line worthy of applause, and yet none came. The audience sat frozen, unsure whether to cheer or recoil. Diane didn't blink. Awake, she repeated. Then perhaps you'll see what I'm about to say clearly. She leaned forward slightly, eyes fixed on Meghan. You say the royal family silenced you. But since leaving, you've spoken on every platform imaginable. Netflix, Oprah, the book, the podcast. Some might ask if silence was the issue, or if attention was. The audience gasped, the kind of collective gasp that feels like air being sucked out of a room. Meghan blinked slowly. Once, twice. Then she leaned back in her chair and gave a cold, practiced smile. I didn't realize honesty had a quota. It doesn't, Diane said calmly. But credibility does. That did it. The final layer of Meghan's composure cracked. Her lips parted slightly, her breath sharper than before. You know, Diane, it's fascinating how women in the media build other women up just to tear them down again. Is that how you've lasted this long? By pretending neutrality? The comment was venom-coated in velvet. The audience stirred again. This time, some audibly gasped while others whispered in disbelief. Diane's face remained unreadable, but the steel beneath her professionalism showed through for the first time. I've lasted, she said quietly, because I remember that interviews aren't about me. They are about the truth. Meghan tilted her head, that faint smirk returning. The truth, she said, or your version of it. The tension had fully curdled now. No charm, no grace, just two women at opposite ends of a moral spectrum, both convinced they held the high ground. Behind the glass of the control booth, producers debated whether to cut to commercial. Not yet, Diane signaled with a subtle lift of her hand. She wanted this moment to breathe, to finish. Her voice, when it came again, was low but deliberate. Let's talk about the monarchy one last time, she said. When you look back, what do you feel? Anger, sadness, regret. Meghan didn't hesitate. Nothing. I feel nothing. They are irrelevant to me now. The room froze. Diane blinked, stunned by the bluntness. Irrelevant. Completely, Meghan said, her tone sharp enough to cut through air. An outdated institution built on performance. It's a museum pretending to be a family. The words hit like thunder. Even Diane's iron composure wavered, just barely. You don't think they still matter to the millions who see them as symbols? Symbols of what? Meghan shot back. Entitlement, tradition, oppression dressed in pearls. The gasps came louder now. The audience was no longer neutral. They were witnessing a train wreck in slow motion. Diane took a steady breath. You've said before that you value compassion, Meghan. Is there compassion in dismissal? Is there compassion in hypocrisy? Meghan countered instantly. The exchange was no longer an interview. It was open warfare disguised as dialogue. For the first time, Diane's patience showed its limit. Her hand pressed against her notepad to stop it from shaking, her tone tightening to a razor's edge. Meghan, she said, you've spoken about being misrepresented, but right now, you're representing yourself. A stunned hush. You talk about power, Diane continued, but power without humility isn't leadership, it's ego. And ego doesn't liberate anyone. That line cracked something open in the studio. Gasps, a low hum, then complete silence. Even the cameras seemed to pause mid-frame. Meghan froze. For a second, she looked almost shocked, like someone had slapped her with words. Her voice, when it returned, trembled with outrage. You don't know me. You have no idea what I've endured. Diane didn't raise her voice. Then tell me. But don't mistake defiance for depth. That was it. The breaking point snapped into fallout. Meghan's composure shattered completely. Her hands clenched the sides of her chair as she leaned forward, eyes blazing. This interview is over. She reached for her microphone, yanking it off with a sharp tug that echoed through the speakers. The small black device hit the floor with a hard thud that felt louder than it should have. The audience gasped again, then went silent. Diane sat motionless, pen still between her fingers, eyes locked on the woman now standing before her. Meghan straightened her blazer, her voice trembling with fury. "I came here to have a conversation, not to be insulted on national television." Diane's reply was calm, almost cold. "Then perhaps you should reconsider what honesty feels like when it isn't scripted." The words hit their mark. Meghan froze for half a second, jaw tightening, before she turned on her heel. Her heel struck the stage floor with sharp, rhythmic clicks as she stormed toward the curtain. Every camera followed her exit. The tension of her shoulders, the deliberate speed of her stride, the fury written across her face. When she vanished offstage, the silence left behind felt bottomless. Diane exhaled once, almost imperceptibly. Then she turned toward the main camera, her composure restored like a veil lowered after battle. "To our viewers at home," she said softly, "this program was meant to explore truth. Tonight, perhaps we saw a different kind of truth, one that reveals more in reaction than in words." A beat of silence. "I want to thank you for watching," she continued. "And I apologize that our conversation could not continue in the spirit we intended." The audience, unsure what else to do, began to applaud, hesitant at first, then steady, filling the studio with a strange mix of awe and disbelief. Diane closed a notebook, set her pen down carefully, and gave a small, measured nod. The red light atop the camera dimmed. The broadcast faded to black. The interview was over, but its echoes were just beginning. The morning after the broadcast, America woke to headlines that glowed like wildfire. Screens lit up with the words no royal publicist ever wanted to see. Diane Sawyer stuns viewers in explosive Meghan Markle interview. Markle walks out on live TV. Clips flooded every feed within hours. TikTok edits looped the final seconds on repeat. Meghan ripping off a microphone, the sharp thud of it hitting the chair, Diane sitting motionless in the echo of silence. On YouTube, reaction videos multiplied by the hour. Some praised Meghan's refusal to be silenced. Others called it a masterclass in self-destruction. By noon, the hashtag #SawyerVS had crossed 6 million views. In the ABC newsroom, the phone lines never stopped. Every network wanted Diane's comment. Every morning show replayed her closing words. "Perhaps we saw a different kind of truth." Those 10 words became the most quoted sentence in American television that week. Even rival journalists admitted it. Diane Sawyer hadn't lost her touch. She had stayed down arrogance and come out stronger. But while Diane's stock rose, Meghan's world began to wobble. In Montecito, the Markle household went on lockdown. PR advisors gathered around her kitchen island like surgeons around a critical patient. Phones buzzed with alerts. Screens flashed with headlines. Her communications director, eyes bloodshot from no sleep, broke the silence first. "We need to respond before this narrative sets in." Meghan, arms folded, stayed out the window toward the Pacific. Respond to what? A smear campaign dressed as journalism. "Perception is everything," one aide said cautiously. "People aren't debating what you said. They're reacting to how you said it." She turned, eyes sharp. "So what? I was too confident, too assertive. Should I have cried instead?" The room went quiet. From the other side of the glass, Harry's silhouette appeared for a moment, pacing on the phone. Even he knew that the damage control would have to be surgical. This wasn't just bad press, it was a public relations wildfire. By late afternoon, Meghan's team released an official statement. The Duchess of Sussex participated in what she believed would be a fair and open conversation. Instead, the interview devolved into hostility and misrepresentation. The editing and framing of the discussion misled viewers and created a false impression of disrespect. Meghan remains committed to authenticity, integrity, and women's empowerment. It was carefully written, but the public wasn't buying it. The footage was live, unedited, uncut, undeniable. Meanwhile, ABC doubled down. They released a short video titled Unfiltered, the full Meghan Markle interview, clarifying that nothing had been removed. Within 24 hours, it hit 20 million views. Commentators on news panels dissected every minute of the broadcast like a forensic investigation. On CNN, one analyst said, "What we witnessed wasn't journalism versus celebrity. It was restraint versus ego." On Twitter, users turned Diane's lines into memes. Power without grace is just performance. Truth without empathy becomes noise. Those phrases appeared on t-shirts, coffee mugs, even trending audio clips on Instagram Reels. For the first time in years, Diane Sawyer, the calm, respected veteran, was suddenly viral. She gave no follow-up interviews, no victory lap. Instead, she issued a single statement through ABC News. Interviews are about conversation, not confrontation. But sometimes, confrontation finds you. My only job is to stay present and honest. That calm professionalism only made the contrast starker. Diane didn't need to defend herself. The world was doing it for her. Meanwhile, the storm around Meghan grew louder. British tabloids went into feeding frenzy. Markle's meltdown, US turns on Duchess. Duchess versus Diane, disaster on daytime. In London, royal correspondents practically celebrated. For them, the interview was vindication. Proof that Meghan's defiance could finally backfire without the palace lifting a finger. Even in Hollywood, her allies fell silent. Executives whispered about reputational risk. Talk show producers quietly postponed planned appearances. Endorsement deals paused under review. The Meghan who once commanded the narrative now found herself chased by it. In contrast, Diane became an unlikely symbol of journalistic integrity. Morning shows replayed her calm demeanor like a masterclass in restraint. Students of journalism quoted her composure in lectures. Late-night hosts, who had mocked her formality for years, now saluted her professionalism. Still, Diane herself didn't gloat. Those who knew her well said she looked tired, reflective, even somber. She hadn't wanted humiliation, only clarity. Yet, the moment had turned into a spectacle far larger than intent. In one quiet ABC corridor days later, she confided to a colleague, "I don't think she came to talk. I think she came to win." And television has no winners in those moments. Her words, of course, leaked. And when they did, they only deepened the divide. Meghan's defenders launched hashtags of their own. #StandWithMeghan and #Women aren't perfect but powerful. They framed the event as an attack on outspoken women. "She's being punished for having boundaries," one tweet read. Another countered, "Boundaries aren't the problem, arrogance is." The internet had split itself into factions. On YouTube, reaction channels ran side-by-side analyses of body language. Every crossed arm, every blink, every change in tone dissected like courtroom evidence. One clip, slowed to half-speed, captured Meghan's jaw tightening right before she pulled off her mic. The caption read, "That's the moment she knew she lost control." It hit 10 million views overnight. Meanwhile, late-night comedians turned the walkout into monologues. "Next week," joked one host, "Meghan will appear on a new show, Survivor, Montecito edition." The audience roared. For Meghan, it was suffocating. For Diane, surreal. By the end of the week, news outlets reported that Diane's interview had drawn record ratings, the highest for ABC in 5 years. Commentators called it a turning point in the era of celebrity confessionals. The shift was undeniable. Viewers were growing tired of curated vulnerability. They wanted something real, even if real looked uncomfortable. In living rooms across America, families replayed the moment again and again. Diane, calm and grounded, meeting Meghan's rising fury with a quiet strength of patience. Parents pointed to it as an example to their daughters. "This is what grace under pressure looks like," one mother told her teenage girl on TikTok. "This," another viewer tweeted, "is the difference between conviction and contempt." The internet had rendered its verdict long before any PR team could rewrite the narrative. By the 7th day, an image began circulating online, a side-by-side of Diane sitting serenely, eyes steady, and Meghan mid-turn, mouth open in fury. The caption read simply, "Composure always wins." And maybe, in that week of headlines, it finally had. But the story wasn't finished yet. Because behind the curtain of trending hashtags and viral clips, both women were left with something far more lasting than views or ratings: the question of legacy. For one, it was vindication. For the other, it was a reckoning. The world had chosen its sides, and both women would have to live with what came next. Days blurred into weeks, and the roar of the media cycle began to thin into something steadier, a low, endless hum. But the moment itself refused to die. Clips of the confrontation replayed on morning television, in classrooms, on news documentaries, on handheld screens at airport lounges. It had become more than an interview. It was now a cultural fault line, dissected from every possible angle. For Diane Sawyer, the noise felt strangely distant. She had returned to her quiet Manhattan office, a framed copy of Time magazine on her desk, the interview that changed celebrity culture. The photograph showed her mid-question, calm, poised, expression unreadable. Students of journalism wrote essays about her restraint. Professors replayed the footage in lecture halls, pausing on the moment she uttered the line heard around the world: "Power without grace is just performance." She didn't celebrate it. She simply filed it away, another chapter in a career defined not by fireworks but by endurance. To her, it was never about humiliation or victory. It was about truth showing itself, uninvited. But legacy has a strange way of choosing its heroes. While Diane's reputation settled into quiet triumph, Meghan's world shifted beneath her feet. In Montecito, the gate stayed closed. The driveway that once filled with photographers now sat empty, except for the occasional delivery van. Inside, Meghan's team cycled through strategy meetings that went nowhere. Public appearances were postponed, projects paused, invitations quietly withdrawn. The charity gala she had been scheduled to headline released a carefully worded statement. The Duchess has chosen to step back from public events to focus on family. Behind those polished words was exhaustion. She had fought the world, and this time, the world had fought back. Online, her loyal defenders carried on the battle, framing her walkout as courage. She refused to let herself be gaslit, they tweeted. But even within that echo chamber, cracks appeared. "Refusing to bow isn't the same as refusing to listen," one comment read. It gathered thousands of likes before the account disappeared. In private, friends said Meghan had grown quieter, reflective but proud. She still believed she was right, one insider whispered to Vanity Fair. But she didn't expect it to cost this much. Diane Sawyer declined every invitation to comment further. She turned down book deals, avoided late-night talk shows, and refused to sit for follow-up interviews. When asked by a colleague why she stayed silent, she smiled faintly and said, "Because silence still means something." Her restraint became part of the legend. For younger reporters, she embodied the disappearing art of neutrality, grace as rebellion in an age of noise. Networks studied the interview frame by frame, analyzing how calm could pierce louder truths. For Meghan, legacy was trickier. Her brand had always been built on reinvention. Actress, duchess, activist, entrepreneur. Now she carried another title she had never intended: the woman who lost her temper on live TV. Yet, somewhere beneath the backlash, her defiance found new followers. Women tired of conformity saw in her a kind of flawed freedom, a refusal to shrink for public comfort. They reposted her quotes, stripped of context, over clips of protest marches and empowerment reels. Maybe she went too far, one caption read, but at least she went. The world's interpretation of that night had split in two, and both versions thrived. In one, Meghan Markle was the cautionary tale of arrogance without empathy. In the other, she was the symbol of a woman finally refusing to perform humility for approval. Months later, ABC aired a one-year retrospective titled Moments That Defined the Year in Television. The Markle-Sawyer interview ranked #1. Diane appeared briefly in the program, filmed in her office surrounded by books and quiet light. Her voice, soft and deliberate, narrated over slow-motion clips of that fateful evening. We live in an age where everyone wants the last word. she said. But legacy doesn't come from the last word. It comes from the way we listen after the words have stopped. The montage faded to black on Meghan's empty chair. The camera lingered just long enough for the audience to feel both triumph and pity. For a moment, even Meghan's fiercest critics admitted it. The scene was haunting. It wasn't just a career moment. It was a mirror held up to a generation addicted to self-narration. In London, palace aides watched quietly from behind closed curtains. No statement was released, but the silence spoke volumes. Within royal walls, there was no gloating, only relief. For once, the institution hadn't needed to defend itself. The world had done it for them. A senior aide reportedly told the Times, "Sometimes the crown doesn't need to answer. It just needs to endure." It was a lesson Meghan herself had once resisted. Her absence from the spotlight stretched into months. Rumors of new projects surfaced, a memoir sequel, a documentary about motherhood, but none materialized. She spent long mornings walking along the Montecito trails, away from microphones and questions. Neighbors said she looked peaceful. Others said she looked lonely. Maybe both were true. 1 year later, a poll in The Guardian asked readers to name the most defining media moment of the decade. The Diane Sawyer, Meghan Markle interview topped the list. Not for scandal, not for shock, but because it captured something deeper, the collision of two worlds, the journalist who built truth through patience, and the celebrity who mistook visibility for power. Editorials called it the day authenticity met performance. Columnists wrote about the decline of self-awareness in the age of branding. And in classrooms, professors asked students, when does a story stop being a story and start being a mirror? No one had a single answer. A year to the day after the broadcast, Diane Sawyer received a letter in crisp white stationery with no return address. Inside, a single handwritten line. Maybe you were right about Grace. No signature, no flourish, just a period and the faint scent of the Pacific wind. Diane read it once, folded it gently, and slid it between the pages of a notebook. She never mentioned it to anyone. That night, the evening news played a brief montage marking the anniversary. Clips of the confrontation, the walkout, the apology to viewers. Then a final still frame, Diane sitting alone on stage, the empty chair beside her lit by a single remaining spotlight. The narrator's voice whispered, "In an age of noise, silence still wins." The screen faded to black, and somewhere in California, under a sky that once promised peace, Meghan Markle watched in silence. No cameras, no statements, no audience, just the faint reflection of her own face in the television glass. Legacy, she realized, wasn't something you built. It was what remained after the world stopped listening.